This is the Thrive Podcast with Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And now, Pastor Fred Jeff Smith.
Hello, welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you are either viewing this on YouTube or on our website, or you're listening to this on iTunes. We invite you to drop us a line at fredjeffsmith@cox.net to let us know what you think about the podcast, how we're doing, things that we could improve upon. We look forward to hearing from you. I am very happy today to welcome a friend of mine, Mr. Gary Chambers, here to share with us and be our guest on the Thrive Podcast. Mr. Chambers, how you doing?
Thank you for having me, brother. I am so excited to be here with you.
Good to see you.
Rainy, wet day.
It is a rainy, wet day. As this is being recorded, the streets are being flooded in Baton Rouge, and I didn't know whether or not Mr. Chambers was going to be able to make it out, but he is here, and I'm very grateful for your presence. Mr. Chambers, you are running for Senate District 15.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about it. What caused you to make that decision?
I think that there's only so much I can get done from the outside. As you know, I've been advocating in the community for the last 4 years, and really just learning how the construct of our government works and what it's doing for us and what it's not doing for us, right? And the highest office of legislative power in our state is the state Senate, and so that gives me the ability to be able to make the greatest impact on the legislation, the laws that we make in our state, as well as the resources, right? There's a $27 billion budget in our state. The district that I'm currently going after doesn't get a whole lot of those resources, and one of my missions is to bring those resources to Senate District 15.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that District 15 does not get its fair share of resources from the state?
I think we've got to learn how to leverage our vote. I think that ultimately we haven't compiled the type of projects that bring in those resources. They're going to talk about the Comey Diversion Canal that's going to come, but that's a 30-year project, something that's been in the works for long before I was, 2 or 3 years old when it started, right? But other than that, we've got a $10 million ER in the last few years, but I haven't seen much from the state in our district. I think that it's because we haven't put the deals together to bring the investment to North Baton Rouge specifically, and we haven't got the partners to the table to say, look, this is what we want to do and this is how we do it. And so I think as we begin to do that, we'll see the resources come. And so that's one of my objectives, to bring all the partners to the table, from the business sector, the public sector, philanthropy, and figure out how do we get something moving to redevelop and revitalize this community that I love.
Before I ask the next question, give us a geographic description of what District 15 is. Northern, how far north, how far south?
Senate District 15 includes Zachary, Baker, Alson, Scotlandville, Brownsfield, Sharon Hills, Greenwood, Park Forest, Zion City, Glen Oaks, Villa Del Rey, Monticello, Sherwood, the Hood, and Sherwood Forest, and it ends right outside of Boulevard de Province on I-12. So it's about 122,000 people in the district.
It's a huge district.
It is massive.
Yeah.
It's massive. A lot of ground to cover.
Is Banks, I heard all the neighbors. Did you say Banks? Is Banks included in that as well?
No, Southern Heights is in the district, but Banks
is not.
No.
Ain't that interesting?
It is.
I grew up in Southern Heights, and I know where Banks is.
Yes,
and so
a street over.
Yeah, I find that very interesting.
Yeah, it's not, and I think because Senate District 14 holds Southern University,
right?
And I think that there's a deep desire for Senate District 14 to maintain holding Southern University, and so I think that that's why the lines cut the way that they do. But redistricting happens in 2021
with the census,
and so if when I am elected, we will have the opportunity to redraw those lines.
Okay. The Metro Airport, is that included in?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So then the Coca-Cola bottling plant is included in your district. I'm asking that because you mentioned business partners and working out collaborative agreements in order to bring enterprise into that area. So I'm assuming you have a plan that would include these people as business partners in the redevelopment development of North Baton Rouge?
Of course. So currently I serve on the North Baton Rouge Economic Development District.
Right.
And so currently we've already begun to foster relationships with BREC, the airport, the private sector, ExxonMobil. And so I'm going to facilitate using those same relationships we built from the commission and bring those into the Senate office and figure out how do we expand on the work that's already being done. I think another thing that has to happen is the North Baton Rouge Economic Development District needs more resources. Currently the district gets about $200,000 a year, and I think that they need to be somewhere around $500,000 or more. The district is just massive, right? And the lay of land that they have to cover, the resources just isn't enough. We hired Jerry Jones as the executive director. I think Jerry's gotten off to a great start. We're actually ending North Baton Rouge Economic Development Week this week, and it's been a tremendous week. Folks came out from all over the community. And so we've got to get him more resources, get the district more resources. I think that happens through multiple ways. I think there can be a partnership with City Parish, the same way the Downtown Development District has one. And the DDD basically provides certain services for City Parish, and City Parish compensates them for doing so. I think we can do some of the same things in North Baton Rouge, and we're exploring those conversations now.
Was there not, and correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't there a dedicated tax that was supposed to go to the North?
So we have a tax. That's how we get the $200,000 that we have. It's a sales tax on hotel occupancy. So people coming in town that stay in the hotels that are in the borders of the district, they pay a 2% sales tax to the district, and that's how we're funded.
And that's primarily Howell Place.
That's Howell Place and some of the smaller hotels that are on Airline Highway as well. But the bulk of those resources come from Howell Place. So like last year when Georgia played LSU, and every hotel in the parish was sold out, we were greatly benefited by that. And so we want LSU to play top 10 teams as much as possible.
What happens when Southern moves all of their games all over the world instead of having their games? Southern never has more. LSU always has 7 home games a year. Every year, 7 home games.
It's extremely profitable.
Southern has 3 or maybe 4 home games a year. I would think that you would do better from this tax standpoint if Southern kept more of their games.
Well, we definitely want the Jaguars home too, because they bring in large crowds. People that are alumni of Southern come in for any game, and that's beneficial to us. And so I think Jerry's definitely going to be having conversations with the board and the president as Southern athletic director to figure out how do we get more games here. It definitely will be beneficial, though.
I think so too. You and I first met right after the Alton Sterling shooting.
Yes, sir.
In 2016.
Colorful time.
It is now 1,033 days
Yeah.
since Alton Sterling was killed, and there has still been no justice brought to his death. How does that make you feel? Because I know that you were a very vocal advocate.
Disappointed in government, because I think we had a real opportunity to make progress in this community at that moment. We had a chance to look in the mirror and see who we really are. And I think that on both sides of the aisle, no matter if you live in North Baton Rouge, South Baton Rouge, black, white, Democrat, Republican, I think that people got to see the reality of Baton Rouge and recognize it. But also in recognizing it, recognizing how difficult the changes that we need to make are. For people like me, those changes don't seem difficult at all. But those who have vested interest in the police department, within our government, and the current power structure of this city, didn't have the courage to make the changes necessary. And that's disappointing, right? And what kind of fueled me to see that you've got to be in the positions of power to make the decisions in those critical moments, or use the power that you're given to make those decisions. And I just haven't seen those decisions made. I've seen people attempt to do certain things, but as you said, justice has not come, right? There's a family that lost a loved one. There's a civil suit that still hasn't been settled. The Metro Council, as recently as I think this week, discussed it in executive session. And This family's now years down the line, and this case is still open to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Blaine Salamoni's civil service hearing has been delayed repeatedly. It was supposed to happen in December, then it was supposed to happen in March or April, and now it's moved again. And so it's like every time the community feels like we're going to end this thing, right, it's back open. And then you realize that not just Alton Sterling, but Jordan Frazier, who was killed a few months after Alton Sterling. There was another brother, Calvin Toney, who was killed after Alton Sterling. These cases got no justice as well. There was two gentlemen struck by police officers driving cars that were killed. And when you look at that and you ask, how do we allow so many citizens to be killed at the hands of our police officers and not a single officer be held accountable? That's disappointing. Last year, conversations around Yusef Hamadi and what happened with him and Raheem Howard, right? He shoots at this young man not far from Shiloh.
That's correct.
The young man was running away. The officer, in my opinion, got a free pass because he was able to leave the department. I'm glad the chief got rid of him, right, by whatever means. But it's sad that the chief, in order to deal with this officer, had to basically just let him go. Right? Just let him not be a cop anymore and pay him back pay.
Because police officers have rights that normal citizens do not have.
And we should ask ourselves, why does a profession, right, get more rights and protections than the people that the profession is supposed to serve?
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
And if you try to have a discussion about the police officer's Bill of Rights, which is the laws that are embedded in our state that allow these things to persist, one of the things that's in the police officer's Bill of Rights, if you or I go out and commit a crime right now and we shoot someone, right, we're going to immediately have to give a report of what happened in an interrogation to police officers. We're not going to be given the opportunity to watch a video. We're not going to be given the opportunity to do anything besides if we call for a lawyer, right? And you can not say anything, but you're not going to be given the opportunity to concoct your story, okay? Police officers in Baton Rouge and all over the state of Louisiana get the opportunity to wait
30 days.
30 days before they have to give testimony.
30 days to make a statement about something that happened 30 days previous.
If you recognize the way the news works in our current society, right? So the media will get it, and everything that the police department knows and everything that is going to come out will be revealed within those 30 days. And in those 30 days, if I'm a cop and I've committed a crime, I get to watch those news cycles. I get to watch the narrative that's being shaped and then shape my testimony to defeat that narrative, right? Which puts me at a great advantage over justice.
Yes.
And to deny the opportunity for justice to exist. And so laws like that have got to be revisited, and we've got to figure out how do we dismantle them and make them fair across the board.
Tying this back to your run for the state Senate, is there something, and I'm asking because I simply don't know, is there something as a state legislator that you could do?
Yes.
Assuming that you became state senator.
Yes.
Is there something that you could do to address these concerns?
So for me, I would bring the police officers' Bill of Rights back before the legislature for revisions. I think that this should be a bipartisan thing. And I think that requires sitting down and explaining these issues in a way that I'm not sure we do. You can't wait till you get to session and in the legislature to start talking to the 38 other members of the Senate. You've got to begin to have these conversations prior to the session, make this make sense to people so that when they show up at the session, they can digest what their vote is, right? Because I understand when you have a constituency that you're loyal to. I understand that for the average Republican or white member of our community, they don't have the same relationship with police officers, so their vantage point is different. And so we've got to do the relationship building that allows us to do the legislation changing. And I don't think that that's happening. It's clear that it's not happening. And so that's one step. And I can't promise you that we'll get it done, but I do think that there are things that we can attempt to do to make it more fair.
Right. You mentioned district lines are going to be redrawn after 2021. we held an informational meeting here at the church back in February, I believe it was, regarding the census and redistricting, and we had the secretary of the Louisiana State Senate come in and talk to us about the difficulties of redrawing these lines historically, not knowing yet what the census is going to reveal. We do have some fairly good indications that the population increases that will be seen in Louisiana will be at I-10 and south. That the population shift is moving south of I-10 and not north of I-10. With that reality, and with the urban centers within the state being primarily New Orleans, Baton Rouge, to a certain extent Lafayette, and the rest of the state being more conservative, more white, more rural, what do you see with regard to potential shifts in district lines, geography, post the census as opposed to the way that they are now?
So I definitely think that we, specifically African Americans, need a greater representation in both legislative bodies as well as Congress. Based on the demographics of our state, we should have a second minority congressional district.
And yet he said, the guy who came, and I wish I could remember his name, he came in and he said that he didn't see it happening. And he was challenged on it 3 or 4 different times. And he said that with regard to the congressional districts, drawing a congressional district that would be majority black would mean having to draw a district that ran from Shreveport to Monroe and then came down both sides of the state. And he said that Shreveport blacks would not support such a thing. Now, I don't know what your knowledge is about that, but you see it as a priority. I see it as a priority that you get a second congressional district. What can we do? What can the church do? What can I, as Fred Jeff Smith citizen, do to help facilitate that?
So one of the things we've got to do is educate the community, first of all, right? Most people don't even fully understand what happens at redistricting, and we've got to get people involved in understanding. One, you've got to take the census so that we can get the data to be able to draw these lines.
Right.
2, I think that the church directly, especially the Baptist conventions and the Full Gospel and the Church of God in Christ and all of these different denominations that gather together, I think it has to become a priority for those organizations as well, and that they lean in on the new mayor of Shreveport, the elected representatives up there in Shreveport, and then we say this is beneficial for us all. Now, in fairness, North Louisiana, because there's a decrease in population, is going to be concerned about some of the same things we're concerned about in North Baton Rouge, right? So we have Congressman Richmond as our congressman,
right,
and North Baton Rouge represents about 17% of his district, right?
Right.
New Orleans is the body of the district, and as a result, many feel like we don't always get what we want or desire out of our congressman because he's from New Orleans, and New Orleans is the base of the district,
right,
okay? And so I can understand that Shreveport and other areas of the state may be concerned of that as well. So we've got to make sure that we understand what are the priorities for those folks, right? What are the priorities for North Louisiana? What are they trying to accomplish? And making sure that they understand this isn't going to be just about us, but about us, right? Collectively. Not just about South Louisiana and the priorities of Baton Rouge or Lafayette, but the priorities of Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Shreveport. And the truth is, I think when you look at the issues that we deal with as African Americans, they're not unique to Baton Rouge. They're not unique to North Baton Rouge. They're happening in Shreveport. They're happening in Alexandria and Monroe. And often, because we're the largest city in the state at this point, we get the most attention. But how do we then take that attention and focus it around the state? And I think that that's possible. So if you ask me, I think that the church can be actively involved in convening people, informing and educating them, as well as using the muscle of the church to lean on elected officials to say this has got to happen.
There are a lot of black folk who hear us say, "Go vote. It's important that you vote. It's important that you make your voice heard," and they're starting to push back, and they're saying, "Why go vote? Our votes don't count." because we only have one black representative in national politics, Congressman Richmond. You're telling me that my vote counts, and yet my vote gets swallowed up in the way that these lines are drawn in red-lined districts and gerrymandered districts. Why should I continue to vote? I look at what goes on in the Metro Council, and we're always outvoted. Doesn't matter how noble our cause, doesn't matter how bipartisan it might appear to be. A minimum wage should not be a fight between black and white. And yet the vote always turns out to be a black and white vote. And people are starting to push back on this idea that you're telling me to go vote, I don't see where my vote counts. How would you respond to that?
So I understand the frustration. More than you know, right? Being one of those people who goes to the microphone at city council meetings and has testified at the legislature, gone to school board meetings and BREC meetings, I get the frustration, right? But what I understand is because we don't vote is why we have these problems. There are districts within this parish on the Metro Council, District 1 and District 12, where we realistically could get a Democrat, whether that person be black or white.
Right.
I think that we as black people have got to get to the point that we are accepting of a white Democrat, a white liberal in some of these positions. But I think that we could get a moderate white or a black Democrat in District 1 or District 12. Because we don't vote, number one, we don't get the representation that we desire. Number two, we've got to give people something to vote for, right? Candidates they can believe in and platforms that they can endorse. Not just saying, I want to go and be the elected official because I want to do more charity events, right? We do a lot of giveaways, we do a lot of community good, and that's fine. But the job of an elected official is to bring home resources and to deal with the toughest problems in our community and figure out how do we get to the solutions of those problems. I don't think we always give people something they can believe in to vote for. When President Obama won in 2008, people said, well, black people went all over the country to vote for Barack Obama, and people all over the country voted for him. It wasn't just that it was the opportunity to vote for a black man. America had had the opportunity to vote for a black man before. It was the fact that Barack Obama gave people a vision that they could believe in. He talked about hope. He talked about change. He talked about the possibilities of doing things differently. And as a result, there were some things that happened in his administration to change things, right? Healthcare expansion and what he did with Obamacare, and the ability to put millions of people around this country on health insurance, right? That were not covered, that Trump and his administration have tried to dismantle ever since then. Elections matter, right? Because people were not enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton all over the country, millions of people did not go vote. Even though she won the popular vote, we understand the structure of our government is an electoral college, and having that electoral college means that every citizen needs to vote. Now, we understand that Republicans also make it difficult for us to vote, right? And what I challenge anybody who struggles with wanting to vote or the desire to vote is, people don't attempt to take from you something that has no value. And Republicans spend a massive amount of time with voter suppression and trying to keep people from voting, which is an indication that it has some value. And so I just think we've got to give people something to believe in, to vote for. We've got to inform them about what it is, and then we've got to engage year round. It can't be we just show up for election year and say, hey, I want you to vote. But if you haven't changed anything in my community in the last 4 years, why should I want to go vote, right? If I go out and there's still potholes in my community, there's still blighted property in my community, there's still abandoned buildings throughout the community, why should I go vote for somebody who's not changing my community? I'd rather just figure out how do I change it myself. And that's why I think we see so many nonprofits pop up, because you have people who have a desire to see change happen. You have a desire to make that change happen, but you're not seeing it happen through the constructs that we believe they should happen through.
I don't know what your position is on charter schools. I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Pragmatically, I recognize that they exist and that they're going to exist. But realistically and experientially, charter schools have been abysmal failures in East Baton Rouge Parish. I don't care what Rolf McCollister writes in his paper about the need for vouchers and for charter schools to expand. The evidence shows that charter schools in East Baton Rouge Parish have not worked. Just last night, the school board voted to approve 2 new charter schools. I know that there's at least one charter school within this parish that's going to close at the end of this school year. Chalk up another failure. What can we do to turn people back to the public school system and devote the time, the talent, the energy, and the money necessary to produce quality public schools, minus these voucher programs? I was reading something this morning where 70-some-odd% of the people who attend school on voucher programs are in DNF schools. So that's not working. Charter schools are not working. What's it going to take for us to stop listening to these charter groups who come in and overpromise and underdeliver, and we get back to developing true public schools that have a sincere desire to teach people and prepare them for the next level of life?
So I'm not pro or anti-charter. I think the reason charters exist is because our public schools were failing our children, right? And there were people who felt that this is a way to try and do something different. Whether those intentions were pure or not is questionable, right? Because
ain't questionable in my mind.
Because
it's all about money.
And that is a reality, that charters get to keep the MFP dollars,
right?
And it's a profitable business for them, right? So
even walking out the door, they're making money.
They are.
Sorry, we couldn't help you guys.
They took
on to the next place, and they take the money with them.
Often they change the charter, do a new application, and they get it.
Right.
Okay. So I get all of the concerns with it. I think that, one, you've got to get a new superintendent for the state and the local level. I don't believe that either of the great white hopes have saved our education system. I think that Warren Drake was a great man, but he has not been a great superintendent of schools in East Baton Rouge Parish. I think that John White has failed the state. We are still 49th in education. It doesn't matter if we've improved a little bit, we're still 49. And if you're 49 out of 50, that means you're at the bottom of the runger. And if Mississippi is doing better than us, we're in real trouble, right? So I think that you've got to change leadership. My sister's got a quote: "Change your people or change your people." And so if we're not changing things within the construct of the job, then you're not the person for the job. Some charters have been successful. When you look at Madison Prep and CSAL, you look at I can't think of the name of this other, and so I'm not going to try to name it, but Madison Prep I'll deal with, right? They've been a Blue Ribbon school in North Baton Rouge. They have almost 100% black teaching staff, 100% black student population, majority from North Baton Rouge. Lamont Cole has been the chief academic officer over there. I think the difference there is it's homegrown. It's people in this community that understand this community, that understand the culture of this community, and can educate the children within this community. I'm not sure that big box charters that have this one-size-fits-all approach is going to work for us. It has not worked thus far. Basis has opened out there in Southeast Baton Rouge. We haven't seen any scores from that, and Basis was given another charter. I'm not saying that Basis is good or bad. We don't know. We've got to see the numbers to know that for sure. Parents are satisfied with the treatment of their children and the education that they believe they're being provided. But the school system has failed to be equitable in their distributions of resources and facilities, right? And so if I'm a parent and I want to get my child a good education, and I'm white, I send my child to private school because I can afford to do so. If I'm a parent and I want my child to have a good education and I'm black in East Baton Rouge Parish, I either try to get my child into the magnet program of the school system or charter, right? Because you don't want to send your kid to a DNF school. And if this charter is going to open up and build a new shiny building, put new bells and whistles in, and make it look like it's a better opportunity for my child, I'll send my child there in an attempt to get my child a better education. What we've got to do is figure out where's the accountability for charters, right? This 3-year time span, I do recognize that if I were a charter operator, I would want some level of time to be able to produce, right, to prove what I can produce. And I think 3 years is enough. But what are we doing to measure the success of them year by year?
Why is there no contingency component added to this? Whereas we will produce X, Y, and Z within a 3 to 5 year period of time. If we don't, we have to give the money back.
Now, that would be very, very interesting. I think that is something that we could look at, right? Let's be honest, most of those people will have blown through some of that money on staffing.
Of course they would.
Right? But they're not spending all of the money on staff. They're not spending all of the money on facilities. And I think that that's something that we can explore. Or there should be a penalty. Or some level of penalty if you haven't produced, because you're taking so many resources away. This rift that the school system is going through right now, where they're looking at a reduction in force, is a result of charters opening, right? The charter isn't the problem, though. The failing East Baton Rouge public schools are. And I think that we've made the charters the enemy because that is the easy part, because charters didn't come based on their desire just to be here. They came as a result of us not producing quality schools.
We have been sold a bill of goods that says that the public school system has failed, and so we have to abandon.
No, I don't think we have to abandon, though.
That's the biggest bunch of crap that you could ever imagine. Public schools were fine right up until 1954. What happened in 1954?
Desegregation.
The Supreme Court said that schools must be desegregated. All of a sudden, across this nation, public schools became public enemy number one. We have to get our kids out of public schools. St. George is coming into existence for the sole reason of forming an independent school district so that they can break away from East Baton Rouge Parish school system and take schools with them as they go and not pay for them. It's the biggest bunch of bull crap that you could ever find. And yet black folk are buying into this stuff and not demanding that our public schools service the needs of our children. We, instead of fighting to keep public schools, we're fighting to get better charters. And I think it's the wrong fight.
I think that when people don't know what to do, they'll grab at anything, right? And so we've watched the school system. I went to school here and in Florida, right? Mm-hmm. And so from 8th grade to the middle of my senior year, I was in Jacksonville, Florida. I came back in the middle of my senior year from Terry Parker, and I went to Glen Oaks High. Mm-hmm. It was night and day. Mm-hmm. The environments that I was educated in, comparing Jacksonville, Duval County Public Schools to East Baton Rouge Parish Public Schools, mm-hmm. right? I just didn't go to school most days when I came back in the middle of my senior year because the environment was not what I was adapted to, and I'm not going to diminish the school that I went to because I think that we had a good principal who was attempting to do a good job at the mm-hmm. time, but I can tell you, being someone who went to school in a different environment and coming to go to school in East Baton Rouge Parish, it is drastically different, right? And I
there was a difference in facilities?
It was a difference in facilities. There was a difference in the quality of education. There was a difference in the control in the classroom. There was a difference in the staffing and just the everything.
In the public school system that you attended in Florida, was there a significant number of white students who were part of that school system?
The school I went to was 47% black and about 47% white, and the other percentage was others.
And when you came into Glen Oaks, what was the breakdown?
All black.
There? All black.
All black.
Yeah.
I went to a school that was almost 3,000 students, and we were a C school. We weren't like outperforming every other school in the county, mm-hmm. right? But we were decent, right? Mm-hmm. And we got a good quality public education. There was no big charter deal. I graduated high school in 2004. There was no big charter deal in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
But private schools were dominant. There were private schools that people sent their children to there. But coming back here and seeing the difference, right, in structure, we had 4-hour periods in Jacksonville, right? 4 class periods, and so we were in class an hour and a half per class, which
was very much the way Baton Rouge High was. I went to Baton Rouge High, and that's the way it was. 4 classes. You took 6 classes, but you only took 4 a day.
Correct. And then you had the alternatives 2 days a week. So for me, the amount of work we did in a week, right, in a day in Jacksonville, we did it in a week here, right? The amount of productivity we're giving our children, some of the behavior problems that I think happen in our classrooms happen because we're not keeping our children stimulated mentally long enough, right? We're not engaging them in the way that is going to challenge them to do better. I think that the Jump Start program, for instance, in East Baton Rouge Parish, where kids get to learn a trade while they're in high school or figure that pathway out, I think we've got to ramp that up. We've got to turn that to the 10th power, to the level that we're taking young men and women from high school ready to go into the workforce, because everybody's not going to a 4-year college. We've got to begin to recognize that and understand it, and begin to provide a workforce for the employers that are providing jobs in our community.
I agree with that.
I think that we've got to begin to have conversations about what are the pieces of early childhood development that we're missing as a state, because the average child in the Black community that's coming into these schools are coming in without the early childhood development that they need. Mayor Broome has a Cradle to K initiative, right? Yes. For me, I haven't seen much more than a Facebook group out of that, but I would love to see that program turn into something that we can get funded either through philanthropy or the government to be able to get universal child care in East Baton Rouge Parish, universal early child care for East Baton Rouge Parish. I think stuff like that is going to make a tremendous difference in us getting our kids prepared to enter into the school system. Because if I am a teacher at kindergarten, right, or first grade, and I get a child that's not where they need to be, and I've got 2 or 3 kids in the class that are where they need to be, then I've got to teach at the level of the majority and bring them up. So this child is lacking. And so I think because we haven't figured that out, I sent my daughter to Greater King David for early child care. And so she went there for the first 3-4 years. She had a late birthday, so I think we did 4 years. But ultimately, Zoe was able to get into the magnet program at East Baton Rouge Parish, and she's been at one of the top performing elementary schools since she's gotten to elementary school. Right. But it's because of that early childhood development. I'm not going to tell you that me and her mom did such a tremendous job teaching her her ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, but we put her in an environment where there was an elderly lady named Ms. Johnson who taught my daughter, right, and gave her the fullness of a young education that she was coming out of pre-K, reading, writing, and doing math.
I understand.
That's a critical component. And so I think when we tackle those problems, when we get our kids started at an early age, I think that we begin to solve some of our problems. I haven't seen Warren Drake or the school system tackle that issue aggressively enough, or John White at the state level, because it's not just a problem unique to Baton Rouge, it's a statewide issue.
It is a statewide issue. My concern, and the reason why I asked about your experience in Jacksonville, Florida schools are funded through property taxes. Is that correct? Is there a homestead exemption in Florida? Are you aware?
I'm not sure. I can look it up, though.
Louisiana still struggles under a $75,000 homestead exemption. Now, you're already one of the poorest states in the union, and now you're telling people that the first $75,000 of your home, you're not going to be assessed property taxes. And so we constantly have to go back and tax ourselves through millages and all of these tax proposals in order to get decent amounts of money to fund things like infrastructure and schools. How can you develop a quality public school program if you don't have the money in order to provide the facilities?
The facilities, the pay for teachers?
Yes.
If you look at Texas, we love to say we're competing with Texas, right? We're not. We are not in competition with Texas.
Not at all.
If you look at Texas, just gave their teachers statewide a $5,000 a year pay raise,
and we're arguing about $1,000.
$1,000 that'll be ate up in taxes.
Yes.
Right. There are people that I've talked to this year that are leaving for Georgia, that are leaving for Texas from our public school system. They're uprooting their entire families, right? Their children that they're taking out of our public schools, and they're moving to Georgia to be administrators or teachers there because they're going to make more money. And I understand it, right? Because they want to provide for their families a better quality of life. I was supporting Andrew Gillum for governor of Florida, right? But Ron DeSantis won, and he's giving teachers that are high performing a $9,000 bonus this year. $9,000, right? That's enough incentive to make somebody want to go be an educator.
Certainly.
Right? Louisiana has got to get to the point where we decide, how do we get there? I think, and most Democrats fear this because they fear everything Republicans will do. I think we need a constitutional convention. I think that when you look at the way that we dedicate our resources as a state, and you look at all of the money that's dedicated that we can't touch every year, and the money that we can touch is education and health care, we've got to begin to open the pot up. If you here at Shiloh or in your personal finances have something you got to take care of, you don't look at just a portion of your money. You look at all of your money and say, is this working?
Right.
If it's not working, let's move some of these resources and get something done. When you talk about ITEP, right? People fought ITEP tooth and nail to say we need to protect Exxon. Exxon isn't the only one that's benefiting from the ITEP exemptions. It's companies all over this state, the petrochemical industry, right? We've got to ask ourselves as a state, in 20 years, oil and gas isn't going to be what it is because we're going to a green society, right? We're getting out of the fossil fuel industry. As that happens, what happens to our state? What happens to our state's economy? And what happens to all that money we're leaving on the table right now that we're not collecting to be able to improve things if we don't diversify this economy? Number one, and if we don't begin to look at these resources and say, are you paying your fair share? And the truth is, many of us pay our fair share, whether it's through sales taxes, property taxes,
the most regressive sales tax system in this nation.
So we pay our part, but big business doesn't.
Correct.
And so when we talk about how do we get there, I think we've got to have a real conversation with the business industry.
And yet when you say something to business and industry, they threaten to pick up their stuff and go.
But I think
Exxon ain't going nowhere.
I think the way we approach the conversation has not always been right either, right? So I sit down and talk to some of these guys that run these organizations, and we have practical conversations about this stuff, and they understand that they can't control this the way that they want to. But the fight for them is, if you're going to demonize one entity, then of course I'm going to stand and defend my one entity. It's across the board that we've got to begin to hit these people and say, you know what, none of y'all are doing your fair share to pay these resources. And then we've got to have a governor that is unafraid of these folks and willing to not just amend it and then be quiet, but then to amend it and then continue to take the position with the community that we need you to pay more. Because if we don't, we continue to be 49th.
I've been saying for 30 years that Louisiana needs to get rid of the homestead exemption. I think it needs to be eliminated altogether. But if you can't eliminate it, you ought to severely reduce it. $75,000 is entirely too much. In this city, that means that a whole lot of people don't pay a dime in property taxes. And yet we have roads that need to be fixed. We have schools that need to be repaired. We have teachers and educational staff that needs to be paid. It's a ridiculous thing. And yet anytime you start talking about touching the homestead exemption, it got Buddy Romer kicked out of office. But Buddy Romer is the last governor I can remember, and I'm a whole lot older than you because you graduated from high school in 2004. Buddy Romer literally got kicked out of office because he dared to say we need to approach reducing the homestead exemption. Why is that such a sacred cow in this state when we are 49th out of 50?
I think when people don't understand something, they fight it. And you've got to not just tell people that you're going to spend more money. You've got to show them what the benefit is to that, right? And I'm not sure. Of course, I wasn't privy to what was happening in the politics of the day, right? But I think that if we explore that conversation, that you're going to always hear me talk about educating the community and informing the people, right? Because too often when I walk in the rooms and we begin to talk about these issues, the people don't fully understand how this works, right? Don't fully understand how much money we're leaving there. When you begin to paint the picture and say, because of homestead exemption, the same way we've painted the picture with ITEP, how much money's on the table with the ITEP deal. When the community was educated, the community supported the ITEP piece of it, right? That these big industries should pay their fair share.
Right.
I believe that taxpayers would even say that among themselves, that if you educate them about the benefits of what will happen in this community if there was more money on the table, I think that you get a better opportunity at getting that done, and I could support something like that.
Tell me how Gary Chambers got to be Gary Chambers. I'm turning the page.
Go ahead.
Normally, when I do this, I start off by asking you to tell us your story. We jump right into issues. So I'm jumping back. Who's Gary Chambers? How did Gary Chambers get to be Gary Chambers?
I'm a church boy. I grew up... So I've got a complicated story. My mother and father were high school sweethearts. They went to McKinley High. They were from Old South Baton Rouge. And they got married young. My mom and dad bought a house. My dad was a mechanic at Richards Honda back in the day, in the 80s, and bought a house in Glen Oaks on Poinsettia Street and had some children. My mom committed suicide when I was 2 months old. Which left me motherless and with a father who ended up becoming an alcoholic for the first 10 years of my life. And then my aunt and uncle stepped in, like good black folk family does, and took me, and I had an uncle with Down syndrome that my parents cared for, and they took me, and my dad kept my sisters for a while, and then so I was raised by my aunt and uncle for the first 13 years of my life. And so my mom, we lived in North Baton Rouge because my aunt and uncle, she was from South Baton Rouge, and my dad, my other dad, William, is from Scotlandville.
Okay.
And so he graduated from Scotlandville in 1962. And they were, I think my parents got married in 64 or 65, and they've been married ever since. And so I grew up in Scotland till I was 6, and then we moved to Glen Oaks. And so I grew up middle class black in Forest Heights. And I didn't go to school with white kids until I went to Northeast in 7th grade. I went to Southern Lab. I was a terrible kid, Pastor. I was a terrible kid. But my story originated there, right?
Okay.
And at 13, my dad had kind of bounced back and got on his feet. And because I was a terrible kid, my mom said, "You're going to go to Florida and spend a year with your dad." And so I was supposed to go to Jacksonville and stay for 8th grade.
Okay.
8th grade turned to 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, and I spent most of high school in Jacksonville, came back here after that, and I started working. And when I started working, I had my first, what I call, I can't say it on the show, but my first moment where I realized I was black. I was at the Denham Springs Home Depot, and because I went to this diverse high school in Jacksonville, I had one perception of race relations that was different than reality, right? And my dad, William, who's older and participated in the civil rights movement, would tell me, "Son, you're going to learn. You're going to realize that things aren't as you believe they are." And so this older white guy was looking for a drill bit. And I was walking, and I heard him kind of saying it out loud. And so I went over and I said, "Sir, can I help you with something? What are you looking for?" He said, "No, I don't want your help. You're a nigger." And I was like, "Oh, okay." That was in Denham Springs in 2005. Light bulbs just started going off like, "Oh, it's real, right?" This stuff happens. And that kind of gave me an awareness. And then you fast forward to Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, And we had just started the Rouge Collection when I was like 27, and our mission was to be this hip, diverse version of 225 because I felt 225 was oh so white. And so we said, well, we can come and start a magazine, me and my two business partner friends. And we did, and we spent a bunch of money trying to get it off the ground, and we realized that the business community in Baton Rouge wasn't really welcoming to young black professionals, not to spending money with us, right? And that was kind of my first window into seeing the climate of Baton Rouge from the business perspective. And as the stuff started happening with like Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, in these cases, I began to write about those issues. And then there was a local case of Lamar Johnson. He was a young man that was in parish prison, and they said he hung himself. This was a few weeks before Sandra Bland. Some kind of way the family got the story to me, and I wrote about it. 40,000 people read that story. And that's what made me know this was what I was supposed to be doing, right? That people cared about this issue. This has always been my home. Even when I was in Jacksonville, I came home in the summers, and I just used to be itching to get back to Baton Rouge, and I didn't know why. But it's because I love this place, right? And it's in the fabric of my DNA. And seeing young black men like myself die either at the hands of other young black men or police officers and not getting gainful employment or the opportunities to succeed made me say, well, I've got this platform that thousands of people are reading. How do I begin to use this platform to share more with people? Met some interesting people along the way, including yourself, who enlightened me about the history and the context of Baton Rouge. And in enlightening me, I remember one person, I won't say his name right now, but he'll know who I'm talking about when he hears this. He basically gave me the budget to City Parish and said, after I was reading wrote the Lamar Johnson stuff, he said, now you're on to something. Here's the budget. Look at this. And when I looked at the budget and realized that we were a city that was 54% black, a parish 47% black, and we got less than 2% in city parish contracts, I was pissed off. And at the time, when I got mad, I just said whatever I thought. And so I just began to write about it. And I had no relationship with Mayor Holden. And no relationship with the council, and I just let them all have it. And I just took the conversations that we had at the dinner table all over this city, wherever I went, and put it on a platform where people could read it. I wasn't special. I wasn't unique or different. I was just willing to say what we were all saying, and people were willing to read it.
Was any of this being discussed in the church that you attended? You came out of interdenominational faith assembly.
No.
Do you think that the church could have and perhaps should have added a texture, a layer to this conversation? Do you think that the church is missing the opportunity? The black church is missing the opportunity to add texture to this conversation, because it's an ongoing conversation that continues even up to this day. And one of the frustrations that I have, and my life is attached to the church. You say you're a church boy. I ain't been in nothing but the church. I don't belong to nothing but I ain't no frat. I don't belong to no civic organization. I ain't nothing but the church. And yet, I am frustrated that the church, the African American church, is not engaged enough in this kind of conversation that can be helpful to providing guidance in how to navigate through this jungle that we find ourselves in.
So I am an ordained minister. I skipped that part.
I was going to get back around to it, but go ahead.
I am an ordained minister, and I used to run the young adult ministry at Faith Assembly before I was the publisher of the Rouge Collection and a community activist. So in my mid to early 20s, I thought I was going to be a preacher one day. That was my trajectory. I'm going to be a pastor. I'm going to follow my pastor, and I'm going to serve the ministry. And one day, he's going to bless me, and I'm going to go out and start a church somewhere or something, right? And as life just became life, things changed, and that wasn't the trajectory I went on. But I have been disappointed in the church in general. With many of the things that have happened in our community. I don't go to necessarily a woke church, right? My pastor's a good man of faith. He loves the Lord. He's taught me everything I know about Jesus and him crucified, right? But sometimes the practical piece of how to live as a black man, I have not always gotten that, right? And that is not to be critical of him or anybody else that's in the ministry. It is just a reality. And I think that because we as a community viewed ourselves as progressing beyond the civil rights movement, that we thought that church could progress beyond the fight of the civil rights movement. I think that we've gotten away from the obligation to do good and seek justice. I say that at the end of every Facebook Live. Most people don't know this, Isaiah 1:17. Do good, seek justice, help the widow and the oppressed, right? That is my mantra because I'm a church boy. And so I think that the church is lacking. Any time in the Bible that God wanted to do something in government, there was a king, right? And any time God wanted the king to do something, he sent a prophet. And so I think the prophets of today have woefully underserved their mission because it is their obligation to speak to government. It's not just to get up and take a picture with the mayor or the senator or whomever and go to press conferences. It is to challenge these people. Now, the prophets didn't always challenge these people publicly, right? Because it's the king can cut your head off. But they did challenge them. If you looked at, and you know better than me, the prophet who went to David. Nathan goes to David and tells David a story because David is the king.
Yes.
David can kill him.
Yes.
David gets mad at the story, and David says, "Who is the man?" And Nathan tells him, "Thou art the man."
Yes.
Right? I think that we don't have enough "thou art the man" conversations in our communities. And that is the role of the church. That is the role of the prophets in our community. And if we are priest and king and all of that stuff that we teach our children, then we have to operate in that authority and that dominion. And to operate in that authority isn't just to operate in the pulpit in that authority, but to lead by example. If you look at, and truthfully, I heard when Alton Sterling was killed, Reverend Jackson had dinner with a few of us when he came to town. And in that dinner, he told us, he said, we ain't never had all the people, right? He said, but the church always had the members of the church that they could mobilize. There is no greater entity within the black community to be able to mobilize people than the black church still. This is the only organized group of people that I know of that meet twice a week, every week. They put enough money in to build buildings and infrastructure, right? Yet, when it's time to do some of these monumental things we need to do, we can't find a preacher nowhere. Now, you've availed yourself to me, and there's several other men within this community that have availed themselves to me to say, hey, look, brother, you fighting a good fight. Let me talk to you. Let me see if I can help you anyway. Let me give you some advice. But that has not been the overwhelming trend. As a matter of fact, I've had preachers who told people, you need to stay away from that boy. He caused trouble, right? I cause good trouble. I cause the kind of trouble that brings about change, and I ain't apologizing for it because I believe it is what God sent us to do. And I don't think that the church is meeting that mission of the assignment.
Well, you get no argument from me. I think that we spend too much time dealing with minutia and internal stuff, and internal stuff has to be dealt with, but I think that we give far too much attention to internal foolishness and not nearly enough attention to what goes on.
We spend too much time worried about offending people.
Yeah.
Making somebody mad, getting a tithe member that pays the right amount of tithes to leave because it's him that work in the government.
But you have to understand why that is. It doesn't make it right. But I have an appreciation for why that is. Because as a pastor of a church, I recognize what it takes to keep this place going. And if you are afraid of offending a certain group of people that help keep the ministry going, that pay the dollars, that keep the lights on and keep the salaries paid and keep whatever is going on. If you operate from a position of fear that if I irritate this person too much, then they're going to withhold their tithe, and that's the way folk vote in churches. It ain't a motion and a second. It's I ain't putting no money in church, and so they're afraid of what happens if the dollars become constricted. You have to operate from the standpoint that I trust in God. I don't trust in the dollars. And I trust in God. I don't trust in the tithe. I trust in God. I don't trust in this group, that group, or the other group. And God is going to take care of me. If this person stops, somebody else is going to start. If this group says no, somebody else is going to say yes. You just make sure that you are standing where God wants you to be. And not everybody is at that place. I wish they were. It would make it a whole lot better. But I wish they were.
I think operating from a place of fear in any position, whether it be a pastor, a business owner, a politician, whatever, puts you at a disadvantage.
Yes.
Right? That's number one. But number two, my generation wants to see leaders stand up and lead. Right? We want to see churches be a part of transforming communities. And if the church is to survive beyond now, I think that you look at the numbers, it's clear. Young people are declining in attending church.
Yes.
Eventually, the older people will die off.
Yes.
And what will be of the church then?
Yes.
Will there always be the church? Yes. But will the church have its power that it does today in numbers and in ability to make impact? I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. And part of that is the fear position that the church remains in instead of being in that dominion conquering position that Christ told us to be in, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. I think that if you are concerned about losing one tithe payer that may pay a massive amount of tithes, consider that losing this one might be a good thing because you'll cut the fat and get the meat. And that if you get rid of them, maybe you'll make room for 10 more on the pew who come in, and they may not make what this one made, but they make up for the one, right? And so if you focus on catering to the minority view mm-hmm. rather than the majority view of our community, and the majority of people in our community are not as conservative as the church mm-hmm. is. Mm-hmm. The majority of people in our community want to see the church step up and say something. If every time I watch preachers walk in the room of any community event, I can always just listen because the people gonna start murmuring. Unless you in the church and that's your pastor and you love him or her, people in the here he come, mm-hmm. here they come, right? Because it's not because people distaste pastors, it's because they don't like inactive people, mm-hmm. right? And they don't feel like I should have to give up all my comfort. And here's the other thing. If the church is paying, the members of the church are paying the tithes, and you are free based on the ability of the members to support you, right? Then you have the ability to represent that group of people in a way.
But you say something that's very crucial, because most black pastors in this community are not free. Mm. They're not they're not singularly dedicated to the church. Most pastors are bivocational. A lot of pastors teach in the school system. So when you start talking about doing something that's going to upset the superintendent of the school system, they're not just thinking from a church standpoint, they're thinking from a classroom standpoint and how that's going to affect me. A lot of pastors work at the plant, and they get the bulk of their pay from the plant. And so they are risk averse to doing anything that's going to upset their own personal finance. So when you say be free, that's crucial. And one of the reasons why we're not free is because we are still tied to these very entities that we are combating against.
So for me, I completely understand, right? Because taking the positions I have taken over the last 4 years has not come without a cost. There are opportunities I miss out on from black folks and white folks that because I take certain positions, I'm counted out. Certain people don't want to be associated with me at certain moments because I'm going to say the truth and don't care if you like it or not. But for me, and I can only speak for me, I'd rather be at war with the world and at peace with Gary than at peace with the world and at war with Gary.
I understand that.
And so I speak truth to power. I can't wrestle. I've got a daughter. I've got things to take care of just like everybody else. But when I close my eyes and go from time to eternity, I'm going to pour this whole cup out. And in pouring it out, that means I've got to speak to the issues regardless of whether or not it costs me something. And what you said was profound to that point earlier, that you just got to do what God says do, right? You've got to trust God. And so I don't know nothing else. I believe in what that little woman, Edith Howard, taught me as a little boy, that faith without works is dead. Right. I got to do the practical part, right, but I got to have faith in God. And if God be with me, if God is for me, who can be against me? Now, these temporary situations of discomfort may upset me, may upset my finances, may upset my situation. But like my grandmother told me, go to sleep and keep getting up in the morning. Things do get better. And so while you may lose this one opportunity, the one thing that I've seen happen time and time again is that there's always enough. There's always enough. Enough comes in at the right point to be able to sustain me and my clan, to be able to do what we have to do. And my job as the head of that house is to figure out, how do I grow that which I have, right? And I'm not going to grow it from a position of fear. I just can't do that. And so I can't make anybody else have that same position. All I can do is live in my truth. And in living that truth, hope that other people begin to recognize, because the truth is, they can't take us all out. If more of us spoke out, you look at the Colin Kaepernick situation in the NFL, right? It's easy. If all the NFL players, black brothers, had kneeled, you gonna fire them all? You gonna fine them all? No, you're not. But because of fear, bench rider, whoever you are, that feel like I ain't where he at, so I can't do what he do, right? Truth is, yes, you can. And if all of us do it, it sends a larger statement. It sends a larger message. That unity piece is a big problem within our community. I don't know if we'll ever be fully unified, because typically when unity comes, we unify around an issue, not around the global community. But we've got to figure out, what does unity look like? What does progress look like? And what are the pieces to the puzzle that create that? We often say this is chess, not checkers, right? If life or business or whatever is chess, not checkers, who's the pawn? Who's the rook? Who's the bishop? Who's the knight? Because each person, each piece on the board moves a certain way.
Correct.
If I'm this one and I go 2 up, 2 over, right? Or if I'm the one that can only go at a diagonal, you've got to know what's everybody's move and how do we move to win. The other side has realized that if this is a game of chess, 3D chess that they play, right? They know this one goes this way, this one goes that way, but it's all in sync together. I think we put checker pieces on chessboards and say, everybody gonna do this. And that's not the way that this goes. We don't get in enough rooms and have strategic conversations as a black community and say, look, this is what's going to work. How do we get there? We don't do enough of taking care of the whole farm. Right? Certain people eat from the trough, certain people don't. If I don't like you, we don't bring you in. All of that stuff works to our disadvantage. I can tell you time after time where we've had opportunities to accomplish stuff at the Metro Council, where if we had just had the black council member stay with us, we'd have got something done, right? Or at the school board, where if we just had the black person run their position the way that you're supposed to, we would have won for the night. But because it doesn't benefit that individual long term, that individual says, well, I'm gonna do what serves me, not what serves the people. And we've got to begin to recognize the people who do that, move them to the side and be like, look, I love you, but I can't work with you on this. We got to go in a different direction, and we got to work with people who want to get to the collective goal. I also think that we got to have an agenda. right? We talk about wanting to see change happen. What does change look like? What is the agenda? What are the specific things we want to see happen? Who are the pieces that help us make it happen? And then what is the strategy to accomplishing it? We don't have strategic conversations in this community enough. We complain, we fuss, we holler, we talk about what we don't like, but we don't strategize enough. We don't plan, and everything that I've been a part of that has actually moved the needle, whether it was the police reform, whether it was getting the ER in North Baton Rouge, whether it was keeping the zoo in North Baton Rouge, there was some level of strategy. Now, it might look like chaos at some points to people, but it is a chaotic strategy. There's always a method to the madness. I don't think that every group of us has done that, and part of that is establishing trust and relationship building. And without that trust, it's hard to make people begin to work together, because if I don't trust you, I'm not going to stay committed. And the lack of commitment to the goals is where I think we suffer. I said a whole lot there.
No, but I agree with most of what you said. The trust factor is major. I am older than you. I didn't realize how much older than you I am, but I am older than you. At this stage in my life and in my career, such as it is, I become far less judgmental of other people's motives. I recognize that they don't share my passions, and I don't share theirs. I tend to be a live and let live kind of guy. If I can't get along with you, that's fine. But I ain't interested in. I don't have the energy to fight with you. I'll just, hey, how you doing, and move on to the group that I can work with. I think we as black folk spend too much time. We as church folk spend too much time fighting fights that aren't worth fighting. 4th District Association, which this church is a dues-paying member. I have very little time for and very little use for. But I ain't mad with nobody. It's just that their agenda is not my agenda. Louisiana Baptist State Convention, which I pay money to, which this church pays money to. I ain't got no use for it because their agenda is not my agenda. What I wish is that those groups, 4th District, 6 parishes worth of churches, 200 and some odd churches in this community, would galvanize themselves around social justice issues. There would be no need for Together Baton Rouge if the 4th District stood up and spoke to those issues. There would be no need for Together Louisiana if the Louisiana Baptist State Convention would stand up and speak to social justice issues. So my concern is not to pick fights with folk that ain't gonna go nowhere. My concern is to find a handful of folk, because that's all that it's ever been, is a handful of folk who are willing to do the work and get with them, and let's get the work done.
When Dr. King first went to Chicago, the majority of people did not want Dr. King to come. There was a small contingency of pastors that said, no, we're going to bring him. The mayor, I think at the time, didn't want Dr. King to come. And several other preachers had said, he ain't coming up here. We don't need no outsider coming up here. Small group of people were bold enough to say, nah, he going to come. And he going to come in my church. And he going to speak, and you ain't going to do nothing about it. We don't take those positions right now, and we've got to. We've got to figure out, and I'm completely like you. People say he running a clique. No, I just run with people who work, who not afraid to show up, who, when I pick up the phone and say, hey, brother, this is what's going on, are you in? That it ain't no shucking and jiving and I got to think about it and all that. I got to sleep on it, pray about it. No, is it right? Is it wrong?
Yeah.
If it's right, I'm with you. If it's wrong, nah, I'm good. I've had my homeboys say, nah, G, that ain't the fight we need to do right now. And I've been man enough to recognize that sometimes I'm charged up and ready to go, and I need to take a pause and listen to my brothers in arms and say, you know what, maybe this ain't the fight, right? I don't think that we get anywhere warring with people about what they won't do. Okay, so if you notice, because I come from the church, I'm rarely critical of the church. I rarely speak out and criticize pastors because I understand the complexities of being a pastor. I've been disappointed with the church. I've been disappointed with my church, and dozens of others that don't fulfill what I believe is our moral obligation to this community. It can't be just praying and fasting. There's got to be the practical side of this, because when prayer and fasting cease, God sends us to do some level of work, right? We got to go out there and do something after the prayer and fasting. And so I ain't got time to be fighting with folk about what they don't want to do or what they do want to do, whether that's an activist, a pastor, a politician. And what people have seen with me is if I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to challenge it some kind of way, right? And so whether that is to challenge you, to go find somebody else to replace you, to move into a different group of people to get something done, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Yeah. And I'm about finding out how.
Yeah. I think that over the span of the time that we've known each other, about 3 years, getting on close to 4 years, I think I've seen a growth in you personally. I think I've seen a change in tactics. I don't mind saying, when you first told me you were thinking about running for state senate, I told you I didn't think that was the right thing for you to do. I didn't see the attitude of a politician in you, but I'm hearing different things, and
well, I'm glad.
I'm open to the fact that I'm hearing different things. I normally close these by asking, but I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway so that you can say what you want to say on it. I have a lot of young people who come across. I use this podcast as a way of holding conversations that I can't hold on Sunday morning or on Wednesday, and to learn from people that I think have something to teach. And there's normally somebody young who has their future in front of them, who just graduated from high school in 2004, young folks. Do you see yourself staying in Baton Rouge? Do you see Baton Rouge as being the place where you want to plant your flag? Your daughter is a beautiful young lady. I've met her a couple of times. Do you want your daughter to live in Baton Rouge? Would that be, obviously it's her choice, but would you feel good about her living in this city?
So I ain't going nowhere. I will die here unless I'm on a plane somewhere else and just happen to die in another city. Bring my bones back home. My real dad, Gary, lives in Jacksonville, but he has already told us when he dies, bring him home. This is our soil, right? I believe that the best that ever come out of the world, come out of this place, whether or not the rest of the world agrees with me, I don't really care much, because everything I know about life, I learned here. I learned from people here. And I literally get emotional about this city because I love it, right? I am often disappointed in it. I am often pissed off at it, often frustrated, and all of the emotions that other people are. When you go to other cities and you see certain things, you're like, man, why we don't have that at home? And that's why I'm running for office, because I believe we can have that. But I think that it doesn't happen if we don't have courageous leaders who come together and figure out how do we get it done, who tell our young people that you've got to toil the field in order to produce the harvest, that it ain't going to happen by no pie in the sky just flying in and solving all our problems. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work of rebuilding communities. That Dallas didn't happen overnight, that Houston and Austin didn't happen overnight, Atlanta didn't happen overnight. I'll tell them stories about a man named Maynard Jackson from Atlanta, Georgia, who ran for Senate, U.S. Senate, who lost, and then ran for the deputy mayor position, and then the mayor of Atlanta. He got elected in 1972, and what he did as mayor of Atlanta in 72 is what produced the black metropolis that exists decades later, right? That if you put the right people in the right positions at the right time with the right resources, change will come. And so because I've seen other black leaders do it in other places, I'm crazy enough to believe that we can do it here. And so I'm putting myself in a position and asking people to join me to make this a place that our babies can live. I say that all the time because I don't want my little girl who's 9 right now to go anywhere else. But I'm realistic enough to know that I got about 10 years to get something done to keep her here. And so if I wait, right, there were people who said, well, Gary, why don't you wait to run, right? Why don't you give the person who's in the position the opportunity to serve another 8 years? Well, in 8 years, my baby gonna graduate from high school. And if I don't do something drastic now to change this community and the trajectory of it, to change Southern University, to make my baby wanna choose that HBCU, right? To change North Baton Rouge, to make the community around Southern University look like something that's a college town where kids wanna go and thrive, where my baby doesn't have to go to South Baton Rouge to live in an apartment, because I don't wanna live in with me. Go on, live your life, right? But in truth, if I don't get started now, the question you ask about, do I want my child to live here? I want her to live here all her days. I want her to see the world, experience the world, and know that everything in the world is at her fingertips to go and see and touch, but come back home here. I want her roots to be here because this is where we from, you know? And there's a quote that says, grow where you planted. And I intend to do that.
I appreciate you taking the time to come by and share with us today. Hope you'll come back again real soon.
Do good, seek justice, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. We'll be back again next time.